author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Can America sustain the two-party system? And more importantly, does it want to? Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's show, we tackle the troubles and strifes that go hand in hand with party systems in a republic that values individualism. And remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Let's get started. Are we on the verge of a clash of the political titans, or just business as usual in a two-party system that always seems to rectify its imbalances? Well, if you're interested in how the GOP and Democratic Party systems are dealing with the possible resurgence of Donald Trump, or even the quasi-guerrilla campaign of Robert F. Kennedy, you've come to the right place. You're here listening to Liberty Nation Radio, and we're fortunate to be joined by longtime host of this here show and Liberty Nation's senior political analyst, Mr. Tim Donner. Thanks for coming in, Tim.
Okay, always fun, Mark.
All right, so let's start with the most fundamental question, Tim. Are people in America sick of party politics?
The answer is yes, but that's also an answer that hasn't changed over the course of my lifetime anyway. People always complain. If you look back at the run-up to various elections over time, you'll hear something in common, which is in the whole country, these are the only two people we get to choose from. You see that going all the way back to the 60s and before that, before I was around. But yes, they're sick of party politics, which is reflected by the fact that the actual, not the majority, but the plurality of Americans declare themselves to be independent, not to be a member of either the Republican or Democratic Party, because it's pretty understandable, because the two sides have become so balkanized that all people see are the most extreme stuff by both sides, because that's what's being pointed out by the other side, right? And so the independent we'll get a sense this year, I suspect, or in this upcoming 2024 election, about the power of the two-party system, because, of course, the Democrats are very concerned about a third-party candidate, which they feel would draw more from Biden than from Trump. So we'll get a sense. But this happens from time to time. I mean, in 1980, people thought the choice of Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter was really not a good one. So John Anderson, who was a liberal Republican, ran as an independent, and he siphoned off about 9% of the vote. It came to fruition again in 1992 and 96 when Ross Perot ran for president. People were sick of the two-party system and how alienated they were from each other, but now it's reached new heights. So the prospect of something other than just the two-party candidates, I think, is, at least in principle, a tantalizing one for the American people circa 2023.
Yeah, I think two things there that I'd like to pick up on. One, you mentioned how the independents, they're the plurality at the moment, and that is a growing trend, I believe. But also third-party candidates, because I saw I think it was an NPR Marist poll recently, and it gave Donald Trump an 8-point lead over Joe Biden among independent voters. Now, even accounting for the margin of error, that's 3.5. Well, that's like the 3.5 margin of error points. That's 4.5 points to the good, right, for Donald Trump. But you say about the third-party candidates, and I think you're right, because it seems that a third-party candidate, Donald Trump is technically a third-party candidate,
right?
As I see it.
Essentially, yeah. He is. He's because he's apart from, and at this point above, the so-called conventional Republican candidates. I mean, he ran in 2016. Donald Trump ran essentially as an independent who needed a party affiliation in order to get elected. He understood that because in 1992, Ross Perot picked up 19% of the vote. That's one vote out of every five, essentially. And yet he did not come close to winning any single state. So Trump understood that he couldn't win the presidency as an independent. So he ran as a Republican. And little did conventional Republicans know at the time that he would not just win the nomination, but basically take over the party as he has for the last 8 years.
Well, let's stick with Trump for a minute then. The polling does have him. He's dominating the GOP primary at the moment. But there's a number of the high-profile Republicans saying that they want him out, and it seems to me that they're really missing a big picture here, aren't they? So many of the people who support Donald Trump, they aren't party loyalists, not by a long shot. They don't want the GOP. They don't want the same old party system that we're talking about today. And if for some reason he isn't the nominee for the Republican Party, I don't think that many of them will come out and vote for whoever gets the final nod, even if Trump ends up endorsing the person who does get the final nod. What do you think?
I agree. There's no energy behind any Republican at this point other than Trump. And if he is denied the nomination, which at this point, deny would be the appropriate word, because, I mean, he's 40 points ahead, essentially, even as he's under quadruple indictments. So what more?
For now.
Yeah, for now, it could be more. But look, I think an important point about independence is, and why that number is important, of Trump leading Biden among independents, is that independent voters, for the most part, have a greater tendency to vote on practical considerations. They're not a party loyalist like those on the left and right who essentially despise people in the other party. They tend to look at it more dispassionately, which means in this case, what Trump has going for him is that his record as a president in stewarding the economy, the peace and prosperity of the pre-pandemic Trump administration, they'll compare that to the situation now with inflation, with the threat of a recession, with people not feeling good at all about the economy. And I think independents will tend to look past specific behaviors to the old question Ronald Reagan first asked in 1980. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? Although in this case, you'd probably say 5 years ago, because the pandemic just destroyed any kind of calculations about the economy and really about Trump, because, as I wrote in a recent piece on LibertyNation.com, what president could ever have been reelected in the midst of a pandemic that had claimed hundreds of thousands of lives? I don't think anybody could. So you throw that out, and independents looking at it dispassionately in terms of how they more likely to answer yes to the question of whether their lives are better 4 years from now. I think they'll believe that their lives would be better under Trump, and that's what that polling is showing.
Okay, we're going to be back with Tim Donner after this short break, looking at this same problem from the left. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back with Liberty Nation's longtime host of this here show and senior political analyst, Mr. Tim Donner. Earlier in the show, we were talking the two-party system and how the independents appear to be breaking for Donald Trump. For reasons, if you want to know, go back and watch the first half. Now, Tim, thanks for coming back. What I'd really like to delve into in this segment is talk about what's happening on the political left in terms of how the DNC is getting its ducks in the row for a return to the Biden presidency. But something that has been swirling around let's call it the rumor toilet bowl, swirling clockwise, I believe, in our hemisphere, about who could be drafted in to replace Mr. Joe Biden, should he not have the energy, the stamina, or even the polling, which he appears not to have the polling, nor the energy, nor the stamina, now that I come to think of it, for
Yes.
2024. And that is Miss Michelle Obama, I'm hearing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we've heard this ever since 2016. Honestly, we didn't hear it in 2020 because she didn't want to run, nor did she want to run in 2016. Yeah, sure. That sounds really good. It sounds, if you're on the left, like, oh, yeah, she definitely would. It would attract a lot of Democratic support, but I think she's not well liked at all, a lot less well liked in Republican circles, in non-Democratic circles than her husband. So the fantasy of Michelle Obama, I think, look, if you take the chaos that it would imply for the Democratic Party to deep six their own sitting president in favor of somebody else, I think they're locked in. I think what's happening, Mark, is that the bill is coming due for 2020. The Democrats made a deal with the devil to bring forward a guy in Joe Biden who was cognitively challenged, to say the least. They managed to get through it because of the pandemic, which allowed him to hide in his basement and allowed him to point fingers with no accountability of his own, point fingers at Trump as basically a killer because of the pandemic. He can't do any of that.
Let's just very, very, very quickly. I just want to point out that at the time he said, somebody with, I think it was 200,000 deaths under his belt from COVID doesn't deserve to be president. I believe that's 1 million now, so that's 800,000 under Joe Biden's belt. So he really can't make that claim with a straight face anymore.
Well, I'm sure that the New York Times and their ilk will be quick to point that out, Mark. Not. No, that the bill's coming due because they had to put on someone who seemed moderate. And if you recall the debates in 2020 among the Democrats, it was a battle to see who could sound the most radical, which scared the bejesus out of the American people. So they had to go with Biden. And then because of the George Floyd situation and his general cowardice, Joe Biden was essentially forced to pick Kamala Harris. So here we are 4 years later. Kamala Harris is an even worse disaster than we could have envisioned. Nobody wants her to be president. And they're stuck with Biden because he's the president, he's the head of the party, and he can damn well decide whether he wants to run again or not. They cannot force him out. And if they do want to get him out, they'd have to go through Jill Biden, who, by all accounts, is probably his closest advisor and the one who ultimately gave him permission concept to run in 2020 and again in 2024.
Funnily enough, there was a Gallup poll recently about I think it was the person that people most looked up to in the world, Prince William. This was among Americans. Prince William of England came number one. And I think Jill Biden was number 2 or 3, which is kind of weird, especially considering her husband.
Well, then why not?
Number 7 below Donald Trump.
Well, forget Michelle Obama, then they should be drafting Jill Biden.
Well, Michelle Obama has
excuse me,
a lot of boxes ticked, right?
Excuse me, I misspoke. Dr. Jill Biden.
Dr. Jill Biden.
See, they could get her to run for president, couldn't they? But they're boxed in.
Yeah.
Mark, they're in big trouble because they can't bring up, they basically ceded the whole morality issue because of the problems of Hunter Biden and the Biden family syndicate. They can't really point a finger of moral outrage at Trump because they'd open that enormous can of worms in their own backyard. Democrats they are in open panic. As I wrote in a column on LibertyNation.com recently about a piece from the founder of MSNBC, a fellow named Tom Rogers, who, in the headline of his piece in Newsweek, said, "It's time to freak out. Donald Trump is very likely our next president." Well, that is finally expressing openly what Democrats have been hinting at or saying in a low voice, sotto voce, until now. But now it's open panic, because if you look at between now and 15 months from now in the election, that amount of time is really pretty ominous period of time for Joe Biden to have to survive, because his cognitive condition is only going to get worse. At absolute best, it could remain the same. Still, how's he going to debate Trump like that? And then if he doesn't debate Trump, what does it say about his own capacity to continue to serve as president?
Then it actually makes me think, if the DNC did want to ditch Joe Biden, that they could always encourage Joe Biden to take the debate stage against RFK Jr. And that would certainly throw the cat among the pigeons. But I think they would rather have Donald Trump in office than RFK Jr., wouldn't they?
Well, it's probably a pretty close call.
Yeah.
But yeah, he is, RFK is what I would call the skunk at the Democrats' garden party, because, he says all the wrong things for a Democrat that are very threatening, and he's been supported a lot by conservatives. But I think, look, in terms of this whole business of this election coming up, the Democrats are not just freaking out about Joe Biden. They're also freaking out about the increasing likelihood of the no labels party. It's an actual party putting forward a candidate, a moderate, most likely Joe Manchin. If that happens, the Democrats are in really, really deep trouble, because he's likely to pull a lot more votes from Democrats than from Republicans. As a matter of fact, the no labels movement has been accused by Democrats of being a secret vessel for the Republican Party.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. But I mean, everybody's still ignoring the significant danger that Cornel West, heading up at the Green Party, could do to the Democrat chances.
Well, it's true. It depends on how practical the Democrats are, the progressive far left Democrats. If they're practical, they'll vote for Biden to keep Trump out. If they're voting on principle, a lot of them will go with Brother Cornel West, because he is clearly a dyed-in-the-wool, hardcore, radical progressive.
He's the Bernie Sanders they were denied for 2 elections. Tim Donner, thank you ever so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're joined today by America's most syndicated columnist and prolific author, Cal Thomas, whose new book, A Watchman in the Night, explores half a century of news that is well worth devouring. But he joins us today to talk about the two-party system, that fount of endless frustration and in this constitutional republic. Cal, thanks ever so much for being here.
Thank you, Mark. And I'm intrigued by your use of the word devouring. Kind of gives a lot of people an upset stomach here, but I know what you mean.
Well, just as a brief aside, we did do a show on Cal's book, and it is fantastic. I do recommend everybody goes and gets and gives it a read. But just to give a very brief rundown on it, it sort of goes like, I like to compare it to Billy Joel's We Didn't Start the Fire, where it goes year by year through all the big stories and gives Cal's perspective. It's fascinating. It's a real zeitgeist capturer. So do go and get it. Or if you don't want to get a book yourself, go and borrow it off somebody. It's just worth reading. So, Cal,
or if you're in Los Angeles, just loot one of the stores.
I mean, that is, we're not recommending that on the show, but it is certainly the shopping preference of choice nowadays, right? Yeah. So, Cal, you wrote this article recently called The Founders Warned Us About Political Parties. And I found it fascinating. And very thought-provoking, which I got to be honest, is very rare. I read a lot of articles, but thought-provoking is rare to find, in my opinion. So can you give us a brief rundown of your main thrust with that?
Well, Mark, the founders understood human nature better than a lot of the preachers of their day, frankly. They had come from England, of course, where they saw certain benefits to the monarchy, but also certain detriments. And so they had lived a life under one form of government, and they sought to establish a different form without the downside of the government that they had left. George Washington, of course, who is regarded as the founding father, the ultimate founding father of the United States, had some incredible things to say. And I've looked them up and just listen to this and compare it with what is happening now. These men were like biblical prophets of old who foretold the future and warned people what could happen if they followed certain paths. In this case, political parties and division. Check this out. From Washington's perspective and judgment, political parties eventually and gradually incline the minds of men to seek security in the absolute power of an individual, leading to despotism. He acknowledges the fact that parties are sometimes beneficial in promoting liberty in monarchies, but he argues that political parties must be restrained in a popularly elected government because of their tendency to distract the government from their duties, create unfounded jealousies among groups and regions, raise false alarms among the people, promote riots and insurrection, and provide foreign nations and interests access to the government where they can impose their will upon the country. I rest my case. That is the front page of every newspaper in America.
This is it's from 2020 onwards, isn't it? With this promoting of the riots, I'm using the finger quote things here, the summer of love that we had. And it's who was it Cassandra who was would always speak the truth but doomed for nobody to believe her, and it seems that George Washington was the founding Cassandra.
Right. Well, here's the thing, Mark, and this is the dirty little secret, and it's not just reserved to the United States, but it is certainly, I think, endemic to the United States. Everybody knows the solutions to the problems that confront us, whether it be the $32 trillion debt or the open border or just, you name it, Social Security, Medicare reform. Everybody acknowledges that's a problem. But in Washington and among the politicians, if you fix a problem, you lose the issue. Now, how cynical is that? Can you imagine that working in the medical community? Yes, I see this patient has a bad disease, but I'm not going to operate because I think that might hurt my funding for research. That's the kind of cynicism that has come about because of the division of our political parties. It hasn't always been this way. We've had, the classic example is Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, the House Speaker, who would argue like heck during the day about issues. And then O'Neill would go over to the White House and they'd have a couple of drinks and they'd settle the problem, whatever it was. But today, they don't do that. They don't even sit down with each other because in the age of cell phones, mobile phones, as you call them, you take a picture of somebody having dinner with a member of the opposition, they'll put it on their next fundraising letter and accuse the other person of treason or something. It's just crazy. So the debt grows, the border remains open, Social Security and Medicare continue to spin to the ultimate demise if something isn't done to reform them. And it's just terrible. But this is what the political parties do.
Well, historically, we tend to say that, the presidents, they were in such and such a party. But it surprised me that despite the warnings that you pointed out in your article from the founders, and of course the George Washington quote that you've just given us here, but it amazed me how quickly after the nation's founding that these factions sort of split off. It's almost as though that there was no way to avoid going back to like the British system. I guess at the time it was the Tories and the Whigs. Yeah. So how could they have avoided that back then? I mean, now it seems impossible to extricate. But we will talk about the future in a moment, if we may. But back then, how could they have stopped it?
Yeah, but we're more than divided now just between parties, Republican and Democrat. We're divided within parties. And that's even worse. I mean, you've got even in the Democrat Party is pretty much secular progressive now, but they've got we're all identified by tribes and groups. And on the Republican side, you've got the economic Republicans and you've got the social conservative religious Republicans. And they're all divided within their same group. Some, let's take abortion, for example. Some are opposed to the procedure 100%. Others say, well, 15 weeks. Some say 6 months. Some say we shouldn't mess with it at all. On the Democrat side, you've got uncontrolled abortion without anything, but the spending problem continues. I mean, that you can't cut anything in Washington. You can sometimes cut the rate of increase in spending, but that makes no sense in either because it continues to drive the debt. The politicians don't want to say no to anybody, and the media fuel this. So if you and they only do this for Republicans. If you got a Republican president or Republican Congress, and they try to get rid of a program that's outmoded, that costs too much, that isn't delivering what it promised to do, then they go to national parks and shut down the government. And oh no, people won't get their Social Security checks, and the politicians run for cover. It's the most dishonest and disheartening approach to government that I've ever seen, Mark.
It's funny you say about how at most they'll slow down the spending. It just reminded me of all the fanfare over the latest inflation figures, and without going too deep, but they're saying, look, we've cut inflation in half. That doesn't mean that things aren't getting more expensive. It just means they're getting more expensive at a slightly lower rate.
Exactly. Well, petrol prices in America have gone back up again. In California, over $5 a gallon, and of course Biden recently was touting his Bidenomics and how great things are. Well, people aren't feeling it when they go to the grocery store. They're not feeling it when they fill up their cars. They're not feeling it. The mortgage rates are now up to 8%. 8%. They were during the Trump administration, I think they were just under 3%. So all of the figures point in the other direction. But this is a problem of politicians not abiding by the Constitution. The founders gave us a wonderful document for controlling government and giving the maximum amount of liberty to the people. Now it's been reversed. Government controls us. Virtually every agency of government has SWAT teams now, including the Department of Education, the Department of Agriculture. Why do these departments need guns and protective gear and military weapons? What is going on with this country? The founders warned us against this, but we're not paying attention. They don't study the Constitution. People don't even know who their elected representatives are in many cases, and certainly not at the local level. You've seen these protests at school boards for the kind of stuff that's being taught. The answer, the solution is get them out of there. We don't send our troops to a foreign country to be trained, but we willingly send our children and grandchildren into these indoctrination camps that don't even study our founders.
You're preaching to the converted here, Cal. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Back to your article here. A section that really stood out to me was a quote that you from Thomas Jefferson in 1824. I've got it written down. He says, "Men by their constitutions are naturally divided into two parties." Okay, so he was kind of giving you a warning there, I think. And as you rightly say, Democrats claimed him as essentially the first president, as it were. But I feel that what he says very much represents what we might call a modern leftist perspective, as in people operate as a collective group, which is essentially the polar opposite of the idea that we're each individuals, and more so that the smallest minority that needs consideration from a government is the individual, which is a position very much on the political right. So there appears to be that divide already there, and although it's perhaps not best exemplified by today's Republican or conservative parties, the individualism stuff. But is this Jeffersonian perspective, is it perhaps the original political sin from which all others have grown. Does that
Yeah,
make any sense at all?
yes, it does. But here's my solution. I think we ought to get rid of the Republican and Democrat parties and replace them with the status quo and solution parties. Now, imagine that.
Yeah.
I think that would be brilliant. I just thought of it. I'm
Mm.
going to write about it.
It's good. Yeah.
But you're not getting anything solved. I'm watching, as we move into these first debates among Republicans and whether Trump will show up and all of his problems, legal problems, for 91 different felony counts now, which is ridiculous. Nobody's actually talking about solutions that really work. Oh, yes, some will mention we need to secure the border and we need to do this and that, but we've heard all of this before. Even Trump didn't fully secure the border. We've got all of this, these steel bars lying in deserts in New Mexico and Arizona because the day that Biden came into office, he stopped building the wall. And that's why we have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of illegal migrants coming into this country, and the Democrat Party will do nothing about it. Kathy Hochul, the New York governor, sent a blistering multi-page letter to the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, denouncing the way he has approached this whole migrant issue. Well, the chickens are coming home to roost, Mark. These are people who declared themselves to be virtuous by calling their states and cities sanctuary states and cities. And now they're, and they won't do anything about it. They won't call on Biden to secure the border. Republicans want to secure the border, but I mean, you can't have a country if you don't control your borders. So I think the parties are now way out of sync with what the majority of Americans want, but they are catering to their extremes on both right in the Republican Party and left in the Democrat Party. And that's why you have the most extreme candidates getting nominated. I don't think that if Trump gets nominated, whether he's in jail or not, I don't think that he's going to win the national election. That's what the Democrats are counting on, and that's why they're piling on with all of these felony counts.
What you mentioned in the article that that the way forward is for an individual to go forward. I love the idea of the status quo and the change things up party. But essentially, I mean, isn't that what they are supposed to be? Conservatives and progressives, right? They're supposed to be conservatives, maintain the status quo while you can. But the idea of somebody else coming in, because it's true that as seems likely based on the polling so far, the two candidates will be Joe Biden, Donald Trump. Assuming
the polling also shows, Mark, that a large majority of Americans don't want either one of them.
Exactly. Yeah, they don't. The vast majority don't want either of these people. But the idea of a third party coming through, it doesn't even seem possible. I think it was 1992. Ross Perot, he got it was under 20%, but not far of the popular vote, and no electoral college votes. And before him, you've got George Wallace did quite well.
Ralph Nader.
Ralph Nader, I think it was like 6%. But
it doesn't take much. This is a very closely divided nation. There are only 4 states that really matter, that are contestable. And all the rest are going to go one way or the other. So that's the way where most of the money and most of the TV ads are placed.
So if you had, let's say, for example, somebody like a Teddy Roosevelt, who I'm going to say 1912.
Yeah, Bull Moose Party.
In the Bull Moose, as a Bull Moose candidate.
Yeah.
He did really well. I mean, he did really well in he got electoral votes. He got, I think he was like the biggest ever result, wasn't he?
Today we ought to call it the BS party, but that's another issue.
the Rocky and Bullwinkles. But you have so many people pushing things like this no labels group, which I'd like to get your brief take on what you think of the no labels group, because to me it just seems like something that is designed to try and stop Donald Trump. But if it seems like it will hurt Biden, they'll just give it all up.
Well, the problem with the no labels group is that they have negotiated important issues, economic issues, foreign policy issues, social issues, down to a level where it doesn't really matter. Okay, we agree on these small things, but what about the big things? I mean, These come out of a ideological or a religious or a social perspective. You can't ask people to change their minds on these things. For example, I'm not going to say, I'm not for reducing the cost of government anymore. That would not be me. That's just not me. Or I'm for abortion on demand. No, I could never do that. So what are the compromises and no labels? And, they're looking for a candidate. Maybe they're talking Joe Manchin, who got duped into this Inflation Reduction Act that even Biden now wishes he had called something else, which ought to tell you something about the flim-flam of Washington. But I follow the advice of William F. Buckley Jr., one of the great minds of conservatism, who said he'd rather win the argument. That's the important thing. Let's win the argument. Just throwing these rehearsed sound bites back and forth like mortar fire from our bunkers doesn't solve anything. Let's win the argument. Let's say, okay, you, sir, are a liberal and you believe in the following things. Have they worked? Have they produced the results that you claim they would? If they did, and if they can't be done cheaper by the private sector, we keep them. And that ought to be the same standard for people like me on the conservative side. If we have history like we did under John F. Kennedy, who cut taxes, who reduced the size of government, Calvin Coolidge, our 30th president, who took office 100 years ago today after the death of Warren Harding. He cut the size of government by 1/3. He left with a budget surplus. Even Bill Clinton balanced the budget twice, once with the help of Newt Gingrich, the House Speaker, and welfare reform. The two of them worked out a deal on welfare reform. It's all coming back now because the more you addict people to government, the more they're going to vote for your party. You see, That's the danger in it.
Yeah, it seems that I can't remember who said. I think it was an economist. There's nothing quite as permanent as a temporary government program, and you're just instilling that into the system, into the culture, the people. It really acts as a safeguard, doesn't it?
Well,
don't get rid of us, or you'll lose these things that we've given you.
Right. The great line, of course, was from Reagan, as usual. The only proof of eternal life in Washington is a government program. It's easier to kill a vampire. And the analogy is a good one because both suck the lifeblood out of their hosts. You just can't go on spending this way. There is no nation, as I wrote in a previous book, that has been able to sustain itself with massive national debt, with open borders, and with a loss of a shared moral value system. And now, if there is no right or wrong, whether it is in spending or in personal relationships, if anything goes, then nothing goes. And this is the history, as I wrote in a book called America's Expiration Date, The Fall of Empires, Superpowers, and the Future of the United States. What makes us think that we can escape the judgment of history if we go down the path of those nations and superpowers that followed this way of spending and open borders and the loss of a shared moral value system? What makes us unique? Nothing.
And on that note, Cal, thank you ever so much. Cal Thomas, thanks for being here today.
A pleasure, Mark. Always. Thanks.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio American Network. I'd like to thank our guests, Tim Donner and Cal Thomas, and of course extend my thanks to you, the listeners, for taking the time to tune in and join us. I'll leave you with the wise words of John Adams, who said, quote, "There's nothing which I dread so much as a division of the Republic into two great parties, each arranged under its leader, and concerting measures in opposition to each other. This, in my humble apprehension, is to be dreaded as the greatest political evil under our Constitution." End quote. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.